It's good to see everybody this morning. I hope and pray that you've had a good week and maybe you're resting up through all this. We're going to be in Job again, Job chapter 1 this morning. Job chapter 1. I pray that you bear with me. I pray this is God's will. You know, this is our third week studying here, and we've only made it through 10 verses so far. And so I just ask you bear with me. Pray for those that are doing lessons. It's a lot harder than most might think to stand in front of a congregation of people or a great multitude. I think would be easier than talking into a computer screen sometimes. So last week we left off talking about the hedge that God provides, specifically the hedge that God had provided Job. And we talked about the blessings that Job had that God had also provided. And right there in verse 10, we see that Satan knew God had provided Job a hedge. And Satan more or less acknowledged in a way to God that he was after Job. So we're going to pick up there in verse 11. And well, we're going to start in verse 10, but we're going to, the start of our study is going to be in verse 11 this morning. Job chapter 1, verse 10 says, "Hast thou not made an hedge about him, and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land." And verse 11 says, "But put forth thine hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face." It's a bold statement by Satan. Satan says, if you take away all those material blessings, he's going to leave you, God. If you strip him of his wealth, it's like Satan's almost saying, let's just try this, God. I tell you what, make him poor, take away all his possessions, the assurities. There's a lot of assurities that come with possessions and wealth. Take away the wealth. And again, there's assurities that come with that. There's comfort and there's stability that come with material things a lot of the time in this earth. And Satan says, take it away, because that's why he has faith. That's why he serves you like he does. Do that, God, and see what you're left with Job. I'll tell you that honestly, this morning, that would take most of us out. And I guarantee you, as soon as I said that, some of you in your heart or even out loud were like, no, that wouldn't take me. That wouldn't cause me not to love or serve God like I should. I think it would. Maybe you think I don't need stuff, or I don't have that much now to begin with. I don't know if I'd even be able to tell a difference. Well, let's look at what happened to Job there. If your means for food were gone, were taken away from you, the people who helped to take care of the land, maybe you owed some of them money, and now your way of making money is gone. Don't be prideful. God knows how to get your attention. God knows how to get a hold of you in your life. Don't tempt God like that. These things that are being taken away, that's what's fixing to happen to Job. Satan has a theory that if God turns his hand against Job, then Job's true colors will come out. The real Job will come out if you take all these things away. And that's true for some. It takes a seasoning to stand in the storm. I mean, to truly stand in the storm, it takes experience. I believe that is provided from God, and that's what Job is going to be gathering here, some experience. Secondly, in verse 11, let's learn something about the adversary. Notice, let's read it again, and so that way maybe it stands out. It says, "But put forth thine hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face." Notice how calmly Satan refers to destroying Job's life here, or how softly spoken this seems to come about. He almost says it with a little bit of etiquette, but put forth thine hand now. It's almost like me asking you, hey, you want to go get something to eat? That's how calmly it would seem that this was presented. I mean, this is a man's life. And I think this is where we see Satan, and he thinks of himself as God here in this manner of control. The thing is if God allows it in our life, there's redeeming there with God. There's no redeeming with Satan. Satan says, just touch him a little. Just start there. Just a pinch or poke before the real affliction starts, maybe. It's almost, it really just shows you kind of what we are and how much we are kept by God. Thirdly, let's notice Satan almost speaks out of spite about Job. I don't know how much he actually studied Job because of what he had said about him here. I don't know that it's true, but Satan says if you do this, his devotion will fade away. So much so will it fade away that he will curse thee to thy face. Job will look up, lift up his voice, and curse you. Job's not real, and I can prove it to you if you'll just do what I'm asking. Maybe Satan did think that if Job was in poverty, that he actually would renounce God. I don't know. Maybe he knew what was going to happen. This was just a way to cause some affliction. But after what Job had said about God, or after what God had said about Job in verse 8, let's read that. It says, and the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil. So after God had said these things about Job, Satan was thinking this would be a great victory. If Job was this great man, and if Satan could get to him, I think we see that no man is touched, or even to a degree, without God allowing it. The book of Job shows us that, like no other book I believe in God's word. No one can touch our lives if God doesn't allow it. This shows God's sovereignty in his creation. Now, on the other hand, if Job keeps his integrity or character, if Job keeps his love or zeal for God, then Satan would at least have some small satisfaction in the hurting and suffering of God's man and the affliction that he would bring upon him. We can say that Satan hates godly people. He hates good men, and he delights in their grief as much as God would delight in giving them mercy and grace. Let's look at verse 12 here. It says, and the Lord said unto Satan, behold, all that he hath is in thy power. Only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. First and foremost, we see there in that verse, like it or not, that God has to allow it. God allows the sunshine in your life, but God also allows the rain and the storms. That kind of power to me, it's really undescribable. I tremble at the thought of the power of God. The thought of that while reading these scriptures, I think this is where we try to earn favor in a way. We know this. We know God has that kind of power. We know these things are possible. We see it in his word. And we don't want to be put in a place like this. We know that it can happen. We know that it could happen. But we try to serve in a way so it won't, maybe. And then whenever the storm rolls in, the disappointment rolls in with it because it comes anyway. I mean, just being completely honest, we try to earn favor. We could say it like this: whatever it is kept under control by God. Satan's power is only allowed to be exercised as God sees fit. He is limited by God, who is unlimited. So God tells the adversary in this verse, all that he has is in thy hand. But Job is off limits. Job himself, his body, his health right now is off limits. God was in control here. We see God's control in a storm that is brewing for Job. This storm is being made manifested for Job. We don't typically like to think of this because we don't want to go through the growing pains. And I'm not even saying that what Job went through was growing pains. He suffered a lot, more than I can understand. We could say this: the permission God gave to Satan to afflict Job for the sincerity that he had in service to God. The permission came from God and was given to Satan to afflict Job. And it was because Job was a good servant to God. Many a good men of God, I believe, have felt this affliction because they had a target on them. And I think that's a challenge to us. We need to be praying for these people. We need to be praying for godly men. We need to be praying for the preachers and pastors out there. They have a target on them. You know, if someone's on fire for God, they got a target. A lot of people maybe read the book of Job and they have struggles with it. They have issues with it. And it would seem that Job was a lamb here, prepared for the slaughter in a way, delivered to the lion, like we studied about in 1 Peter 5:8 last week. We won't turn there, but Satan is constantly going about seeking whom he may destroy. But I'm going to say something here. In the end, God would get the honor and glory in this trial of Job's life. And God would be more real to Job than ever before. And you know something, even with all the suffering and loss, I do believe God allowed Job to have honor too, as well, through all this. It was for Job's good and for God's honor and glory. We can agree on that, I believe. We don't want to go through things. We don't want to go through trials and struggles and problems. We like our routines. We want to keep things normal. But whether we want to go through it or not, it's coming and God's in control. Let's hold your place in Job and let's look at Luke chapter 22 this morning. Luke 22, verse 31, 32. This is something that I think we studied a few weeks or a few months ago. I really can't remember, but I just remember we studied it. In Luke 22, verses 31 and 32, it says, "And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not, and when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren." So we won't go too far into that, but we understand Satan desires God's people. And again, we studied it, so I don't want to reteach it. But we see the desire that Satan has to get after God's people. How Jesus even told Peter, "Hey, Peter, you're going to deny me." But Jesus says, "I've prayed for thee, that your faith fails not." The storm's going to come. You're going to feel its presence. It's going to be real. But I have you. You will fail not. You are in my hand. I'm allowing it to happen. I'm going to sustain you through the storm. Turn over to 1 Peter chapter 1. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 7. First Peter 1:7 says this. It says that the trial of your faith, being much more precious than of gold. I love that. It has the value of it is so much more than we think. The material things that we put, our faith is very precious. The precious than of gold that perisheth means it's going to fade away. Our faith is forever. Though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ. I love that verse. I wouldn't trade the faith given to me for nothing. Even the strengthening of it. You know, it's not fun when you're going through the furnace of refining. But when you come out, let's turn there. Turn to Job chapter 23. Job 23, let's see which verse. Job 23, verse 10. It It says, but he knoweth the way that I take. When he hath tried me, I shall come forth as gold. So we don't want to trade the faith that God give us for anything. But understand what Job's telling the three miserable comforters there in Job 23. He's saying, hey, you're expecting to hear things about me in a bad way. You think there's sin in my life that no one else knows about. You think all these things are happening because I've done wrong, because I deserve this. And we can honestly say we deserve things. But you think you're going to hear things about me in a bad way. Job is saying, listen, I have been refined. This storm is of God. The storm came from God. And I don't know why it's here, but it's here. But the refining, God's just shown us, even in the times now, he's shown us what's important in our lives. He's shown us that we need to be refined. And the refining is really just shaking off, beating off, and melting off all the things that aren't pure. Turn to Revelation 20, verse 1. We'll get back to Job here in just a minute. But on the thought of Satan seeking whom he may devour, going to and fro in the earth, and then what we're reading in Job the last 3 weeks, I want us to look at Revelation 20, verse 1, because I think there's comfort here. It says, and I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the keys of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. That's all we'll read. A chain. One day God will bind and bound Satan in the place that was created for him. Listen, God's in control. And here in the life of Job, God is, was, and will be in control. It's never out of God's control. I know a lot of the time for us, it feels like control has been lost. And it's because we're not in the driver's seat anymore. But our Creator has the power. Satan did not have access to Job without asking permission first. God said Job's body is off limit. The power you have is an allowed power that is limited. Satan has no power. It comes from above. And that thought to me is at least humbling, to think on this. Who else but God's people can go through something so hard in life? The storms of life, the struggles, the trials. We know life's going to be hard. The storms we face, we lose loved ones. There's pain and suffering. There's health has been attacked. God's churches have been attacked. God's people are being attacked. And I'm not trying to sound like a woe is me thing. But through all the things, we can say God's been good. I've been a recipient of grace and mercy that are so undeserved. We don't usually say it while we're going through it, but the mercies I've known will make my tongue say it like the prophet Jeremiah, like a fire burning inside me. God has been good in my life. And God has still been a good God to me. Like the old hymnal, whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. We all have our own struggles. Each person, I believe, has their besetting sin. We have the things that we struggle with the most. And we've all cried tears out of being hurt, out of pain, maybe some bitter tears. We've lacked understanding in the storm. But I tell you, even in the storm, grace and mercy were abundant. For me, I didn't want to look around for it, but it was there. Like that song says, grace fell down upon me undeserved. I tell you this morning, God's given me everything. And he's been so good to me in my life. And I've been so blessed. And there's need to praise in the storm. I believe we see that in the book of Job. There's a need to praise in the middle of the storm. Before we get into verse 13, let's reread verse 12 in Job chapter 1 again. I'm sorry. Job 1, then let's reread verse 12. It says, and the Lord said unto Satan, behold, all that he hath is in thy power, only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. The end of verse 12, Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. I believe he had to have permission in a way to leave the presence of God at that point. I also believe that old serpent, that great adversary, left feeling pretty good. He was proud of the permission he had or the permission he had received, thinking maybe he had some sort of power, influence, pulled one over. I don't know. but he was happy for the evil he was going to bring against Job. I believe this was number one on Satan's to-do list. And I don't think there was much time wasted going after Job. I honestly believe Satan already had a plan and was wanting to put it into action right away. That he wasn't going to go to and fro on the earth when he left. He was going straight to Job, and Satan could not wait to test that hedge. He'd been wanting after Job for a while. And we don't understand that. We get up and we go through our daily routine. We have our things that we worry about that when we're humble, we're really going to admit that aren't that important. But, the war is a spiritual war, and there's things going on we don't even know about. And we have to understand that just because we're uncomfortable doesn't mean God's not in control anymore. Let's look at verse 13. It says, "And there was a day when his sons and his daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house." I thought about the beginning of verse 13 for 2 days straight, all day Thursday and Friday. And there was a day. There was a day. We don't know what each day is going to hold. I get up in the morning. I go about my morning routine. I'm already thinking about the day and the things that come to pass. And I have a schedule. And we really don't know squat about what's going to happen that day. We think we know, but we don't. I may get in my truck and there may be a wreck 5 minutes down the road, 5 miles down the road. Maybe a job layoff. Maybe a virus is going to hit the world and turn it upside down like I've never seen before. We don't know what each day holds. That day may hold a great blessing. We plan like we think we know what's going to happen because there is some normality, but we really don't know. But each person that's listening right now has had a day like this, a day that didn't go as planned. A day maybe that we were brought to our knees, perhaps, to be put out, just to put it out there, a day that we felt forsaken, that we didn't understand why this was happening. There's hard times in this life, for a life that seems so short on this earth. It's full of a lot of struggle. This day in Job's life, I think he got up. I believe he was planning on making some sacrifices for his children like he did, like we studied in part one of this a couple weeks ago. I think he got up and he had a plan that day. I think his children were on his mind. He had meet maybe with all the managers there on his farm or ranch. But he got up. I think the sun was shining. I think it was a beautiful morning. Not a storm cloud in the sky. I think it was a regular morning that we all take for granted. Just like in all this mess going on right now, it's those small little freedoms that we're finding out we miss the most. And I think it was another day for Job. Poor Job was just going about his life, his duty to God, and he knew nothing of this matter. He was unaware of the things that were coming his way. That shows us how small we are, I believe. But you know what? God knew. And God knew Job. And God knew Job's name. He knew the hairs on Job's head. God knew Job before God created the earth. God knew Job before the storm. And God definitely knew Job after the storm. God knew Job before, during, and after the hedge. So the day went on like normal. And all of Job's children here are gathered together again, just like we read about in verse 4. The only difference in verse 13 and verse 4 is that it mentions the word wine here. Maybe that's what Job was really worried about whenever he was making these sacrifices. I don't know. But let's understand that the day was normal for Job's children too. They were enjoying life. They had wine, they had food, they had drinks. They were blessed. Blessings that rode over from the Father. And I believe Satan chose this day and this moment to attack. Hold your plate. Well, I think we can let go of Job. Let's turn to Isaiah 21 for just a moment. The book of Isaiah 21. In verse 4, it says, "My heart panted, fearfulness affrighted me. The night of my pleasure hath he turned into fear unto me." You know, when we least expect it, when we get comfortable, that's when we've put ourselves in a dangerous position. I was told by an older man who's no longer with us shortly after the Lord saved me. He spent several moments teaching me and telling me to stand ready, and the reason it was important. He said the battle's just started for you. And I believe this verse shows us, and really the whole book of Job, that, hey, things are going good, but just wait, it'll change. We got to stand ready. We don't know what each day holds. I know that this is kind of a weird place for us to stop in our studies this morning, but I'd kind of like to study the attacks at one time if possible, or as much as one time as we can. So I'd kind of ask that you'd please pray for that. Pray for our church and country and those that are teaching. You know, teaching is not preaching. And I don't claim to be a preacher or a pastor, but I have an appreciation for the men of God over the last few years. You know, teaching to wear on you, the amount of time of studying that goes into each lesson that may be a 30-minute lesson. Sometimes there's 10 to 15 hours in that lesson. So I just ask that you pray for everyone in our church that stands before us. I'm thankful that we have men that do that. I want to share something with you this morning. I think of this verse every time I study Job. It's a marked verse in my Bible, and it's helped me in a lot of times and in a lot of weird ways, I think. And maybe you can draw from it as well. And it's Genesis 3, verse 17. A lot of people ask why God, a loving, merciful God, would allow this to happen to Job. And I think of this verse. This verse would be my answer. I'm not saying it's the only answer, but it's let's just read it. Genesis 3, verse 17. It says, "And unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, Thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake, in sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life." The ground is cursed for our sake. That's a thought. After everything, and you know, we know we've all studied the book of Job. After everything that Job went through in the end, he drew closer to God. He lost some things along the way. I'm not saying he didn't. I'm not saying there wasn't pain, hurt, or suffering, but he drew closer to God. And I'd leave you with this morning. Some lyrics of a song that I heard the other night, and then we'll close out. But it makes a lot of sense. It says, "It's a blessing when I see the dark clouds parting, when the rain is gone and the sun is breaking through. I anticipate when life will just be normal, just to close my weary eyes and rest in you. My heart can rest so easy when there's blue skies, when the wind is gone and the rain is not in sight. How I long to hang my sword above the mantle, away from harm and distant from the fight. But I wouldn't know your peace without the hard times, or be thankful for relief without the pain. I wouldn't love the light if it were not for darkness, or appreciate the sun without the rain. How could I understand forgiveness without failure, or feel the warmth of love without the bitter cold? How could I hold your healing hands without affliction, and be blessed to see your mercies all unfold? Sure, it's a blessing to be safe, secure, and warm, but Lord, I want to thank you for the storm." That's just a small part of that song. But I think the real challenge to me this week in studying all this has been to give thanks in the trial. I've seen trials break many a good man to the point where they were no longer being used or felt worthy to be used. But in the trial, we must give thanks and we must look around because we're going to find unmerited grace and mercy in the storms. And I believe that, Lord willing, if God allows us to keep studying through this book, we're going to see that. And I just find it so glorifying to God that He's in control and we're not. Because if I was in control, I'd make even a bigger mess of it than I think it already is. So that's the lesson. I pray you have a good week. Pray for our church. Look forward to seeing you all again when we can. Let's be there for one another, like we talked about last week. Thank you for tuning in this morning.